All right, good morning, everybody. Happy Saturday, and welcome back to another episode of Black Mental Health Matters. My name is Trinity Thompson. I'm going to be your host for this morning. I am partially sick, but what I wanted to say was that I'll be your host this morning. I'm an MSW candidate at the University of St. Joseph. I'll be starting in the fall, and I'm also now a case manager. I know sometimes in the past I introduced myself as a psychiatric technician. I have now moved on with a new career, and I'd like to present our guest today, Carla Carlisle. She is an executive director at the Compassionate Companion, and I just want to turn, the mic over and let Carla introduce herself. So tell our viewers a little bit about who you are, your experience with mental health. Give us a little insight about your title.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Trinity. So my name is Carla Carlisle, and I am the executive director of the Compassionate Companion. I am a former foster mother, then adoptive mother, and my son is now 13. My experiences parenting my child and just, going through the experience of co-parenting at one point for like 6 years with his birth parents exposed me to a lot of trauma along with my son. And so together for over 6 years, we experienced significant trauma together, which led to both of us having mental health conditions. My specific conditions are anxiety and depression, and his are PTSD and DMDD, which is disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. A lot of people aren't familiar with that, but a lot of children were diagnosed with ODD, oppositional defiance disorder, but his is DMDD, which is in the DSM-5. I say all that to say, based on our experiences, it really drove me or led me to educating others and opening up our story and our journey to first say, you are not alone in your experiences. Everyone deals with mental health in some form or fashion, either individually or with their loved ones or someone they interact with personally or professionally. And it just wanted to also have a forum, which is the Compassionate Companion, to give workshops and talk about intergenerational trauma, mental health disorders, and things that a lot of times are taboo in our communities. But we know that they are very critical to us feeling better. And when I talk about feeling better, I look at things holistically. Our mental health is a part of our health, and it's tied to physical, emotional, financial, spiritual, all aspects of our health. And so I really take a holistic approach to what I do. And so I really appreciate being here, Trinity, and I look forward to our conversation.
I do too. I definitely wanted to touch base on your own personal diagnoses because I do deal with the same thing. Both uh, in the DSM-5, it says generalized anxiety disorder and then major depressive disorder, but more commonly known as depression and anxiety.
Yes.
And I really think I've been dealing with anxiety my whole life. I just didn't really understand like what it was. I didn't know that it had a name. I just always like kind of felt on edge and overwhelmed, and like there were times where I felt like I couldn't really like deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like I didn't know what it was, and I just kind of like pushed it to the side because I was always like a high achiever in high school. So like when I always got like the same stomach ache around the same time of day, I didn't think much of it until I got to college, and my depression started to like kind of like take a head, and I started like feeling like super sad all the time, feeling down, found myself isolating, self isolating, and just I think late 2019 is when I really decided that it was time to like maybe go see somebody. I had did the counseling thing a few times before, but I really found like an actual therapist, a psychologist, and started seeing a psychiatrist as well. And I think that's what also kind of like prompted me to take more initiative to like join the mental health community, especially the Black mental health community, because our experiences as Black women, as Black people, it's not easy to even one like find or think that there's a problem. You think that kind of like the world is just the weight of the world is on your shoulders, and that's
That's
just kind of
right.
what we deal with, carrying that burden. But there's also resources out there. But the problem is that there's not enough competency out there. There's not enough representation.
Right. That
So
cultural competency is critical.
Yeah,
I
it
think
is.
also there's so much stigma around it
Mm,
that even if you get to the point of saying, okay, I think I need to talk to someone, sometimes people feel a lot of shame about it. And I
mhm,
think it's important that we have these conversations because it normalizes things. Like you, I've had experiences in youth and have continued on where my anxiety is through the roof, but I never called it that. I remember being in therapy as an adult for 2
mhm.
years before I could say the word anxiety. I would just say, I'm stressed out. I'm stressed out. Why was
Yeah.
it so hard to just say it's anxiety? Because that's exactly what was going on and what, I continue to deal with, but
Mhm.
I'm able to manage it better now. I always wondered why, something very simple to someone else, to me, was a big production. Everything had to go perfectly, which is a setup for failure, right? Because
Yes, exactly.
and strive for excellence, but striving for perfection is a setup for failure.
Yeah. I think, like I said, just being a high achiever and then like
Yes.
you take on unnecessary like stressors and
Mhm.
unnecessary and like you said, like something that could be so simple to somebody else, like it's like a production. And
Yes.
I definitely feel it. Like I said, in high school and then going into college, I just felt like everything has to be perfect. I was always used to like getting
Mhm.
really good grades. So then when I got to college, the curriculum was set up a little bit different than like what I was used to in high school, obviously because it's college, but also
Yes.
because of the specific program that I was in high school. So it took a lot of like relearning and,
Mhm.
accepting failure as a part of life failure was not in my language at all prior to college.
Yeah.
And I always said jokingly to my friends, sometimes it's about taking your L, taking your loss, and going about your day because it does happen. So I
And
think,
we gain a lot from that, right?
yeah,
We learn more from so-called failures
hmm
a lot of times than successes. But we have to be open to that learning and recognize that we're going to gain something no matter what happens. And setting ourselves up for failure means to me, that equals like we're trying to be perfect.
hmm
There's something to gain in every situation. And I think it's okay if we don't hit that milestone, if we don't if we trip and take a stumble and have to ask for help, that's okay too. um, I mean, I've talked to a lot of leaders in different communities, and almost everyone said, they've learned more from their stumbles, from their so-called failures, than their wins.
right.
You're dealing with a team, but you can fail alone. We can fail with other people as well, but I think there's a lot more of a chance when we have our support system in place, whether that's in the workplace or that's personally. And so to do that, we have to be willing to ask for help. And I think it definitely for me includes therapy, but it goes beyond that too. I mean, I've had to socialize with my family and friends like, hey, I'm dealing with something.
hmm
I may be very irritating to you. I may be super sad. You may not just understand where I'm coming from.
hmm
But just know that, I'm going through this and I still love you, but I just need some grace. And I have to give that to myself as well.
I think you are definitely hitting like the nail like straight on the head because it's everything that we're about to get into today. So I really, for our viewers, I really just thought it was important for you to kind of get a background, like a little bit of an insight as to like Carla and myself and pretty much what thousands, maybe millions of Black Americans, Black people across the our African diaspora, things that we deal with and that we might not be so comfortable and so eager to talk about and to open up about.
Mhm.
But today's show is really going to center around not only parenting with mental illness, so if you are the parent and you are dealing with mental health struggles, but also being a parent or a caregiver or a guardian, whatever the title that you give yourself, dealing with a child or children or caring for somebody that has mental illness. So I just wanted to explore kind of like a bunch of different perspectives and a bunch of different aspects from like the situation of being or having the role of a caregiver and having a mental illness or being a caregiver caring for somebody with a mental
Mhm.
illness. So one of my first questions to you, which we kind of touched based on, was how old were you when you first started like presenting symptoms, and like what was like the age that you actually got diagnosed at?
So in hindsight, I
Mm-hmm.
had symptoms of definitely anxiety from a young age. I would say definitely high school, it increased in college, grad school, absolutely. And it wasn't really until I would say I've had, different rounds of therapy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every time I went through therapy as an adult, I focused on that person I was caring for or I loved and how I could cope. But I didn't take that next step. And at the time, whatever therapist I had was helping me deal with a crisis. So we didn't look at the impact on me. It really wasn't until my son came into my life when he was 10 days old and I was in my 40s that, and when I was going through therapy, like I said, my therapist said, that sounds like anxiety, Carla. And I was like, oh, I'm just stressed out. Like you're
Yeah.
living in hypervigilance mode and you've been doing this for 6 years. It's not sustainable. We have to look at you because how are you going to be if and when you finally do get custody of this child? And I can tell you that by the time I got emergency custody of my son when he was 6, I was 40 pounds overweight. I was over $100,000 in debt.
Mm-hmm.
Mentally and emotionally, I was just a mess. Like I said, I was isolated. And that's really when I got my formal diagnoses. But what I think is important is like in hindsight, we can look back and say, oh, I was dealing with all these things and I didn't realize it. I wish I had gotten help then. But that is in the rearview mirror.
Right.
We know now so we can gain knowledge from what happened before, but I don't have regrets because that's just how it rolled out for me. I do encourage people to, take self-assessments, talk to their doctor, talk to their child's pediatrician, because there may be a diagnosis there. And I don't think that a diagnosis is uh, like something negative necessarily. It can be used in a negative way, but
Mm-hmm.
also can be used to get help. And that's really the lens that I look at it from. And so for me, I was able to better target like what I needed out of therapy with the help of my therapist and really focus more on me because I could not be of support to my child if I wasn't on the path to healing, if I
Right.
wasn't focused on being my best self.
Right. No, I definitely hear that, and I appreciate you for like opening up and just like sharing that story. I think that it's especially like hard when you're younger and you don't really know what mental health looks like. It's not something that's often discussed in our community. So I think I can remember just like as early as like elementary school, I used to hate when we would get a substitute because the class would be so unruly, and I would get like headaches. I would just go to the nurse's office, like try to get picked up and go home. I hated it. And I really thought that, and in addition with my parents, they thought, I was just kind of like timid and quirky. I always had like social anxiety, never wanted to like play with or I didn't know of it as social anxiety, but I never wanted to like play a lot with other kids when I was growing up. Like I was
Mhm.
always kind of like doing my own thing, but that's just kind of how my parents saw me. Like, oh, she has two sisters. They're the outgoing ones. They're the social butterflies.
Mhm.
Trinity is just the one
Mhm.
that would rather like stay to herself. But
Mhm.
it wasn't until like I got older and I left my parents to go to college, and I had increasing feelings of anxiety and like being in certain social settings. And it wasn't until then that of course like I obviously had more self-awareness and I was able to kind of put titles to the things that I was feeling. Because when
Yes.
you're younger, you don't know what you're feeling. You just know that you're feeling
Right.
it. You
That's
can't
right.
really, yeah, you know basic emotions like happy, sad, scared, but to call something anxiety when you don't even know what the word anxiety means or never
That's
heard of
right.
it before. Yeah.
That's And so for me, just thinking about your story and looking back on mine in high school, I was in a really bad car accident with 4 other girls. And one of the girls in our car passed away uh, later that day. The rest of us were in the hospital for varying times, but average of a week. And I was probably hurt the least, but I probably looked the worst because everything was facial. All of my injuries were facial in the top of my head, but that was traumatic for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was always had this people pleaser aspect to my personality, but it went into overdrive at that point. I wanted to be liked. I wanted to be accepted. And I think it went into an unhealthy realm of me just desiring to be accepted. So my anxiety was not social anxiety because I was the extreme extrovert, but I think it was in a very unhealthy way. And it
Right.
was again seeking perfection when it didn't exist. And so if I felt rejected or if I felt not accepted for who I was, because I was always a little different, you know. Um, it was so hurtful. And it's like, what did I do wrong? Let
Yeah.
me try to fix this. Let me try to fix this person because maybe they'll love me, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I experienced that a lot at a young age. And when I was exposed to healthier relationships, now let me tell you, we lost my mom right before the pandemic, but my parents were married for 66 years. So I knew how to love. I did not know how to deal with what I felt was rejection.
Right.
It was probably a blessing, actually. It was probably not the right situation for me. But when you're dealing with anxiety and even some aspects of ADHD, things are amplified.
Yeah.
And that self-reflection, I think, becomes self-judgment. And so I can look back and see so many signs that I just didn't realize
Mm-hmm.
back then were tied to anxiety. And I think that's something that I've seen a lot in my family as well. My dad, he's elderly now. He deals with anxiety, and I see that in myself. I
Mm-hmm.
see, like, if I have to be someplace, I need to be early or on time. And that may sound very simple to somebody else who's fine with coming in 30 minutes later or something. Well, for me, it's like the world has ended.
Yeah.
If I've made a commitment, if I can't honor that commitment, I'm in 100% panic mode. But it's not like typical, like I procrastinated and I got to get it done. No, this is like I'm on fire. Like the house is on fire.
Mm-hmm.
It is extreme to me. And I have to manage that within myself because I see in a different way some of those things in my son. And so my son is now 13. He's dealing with hormones and everything else. Um, and his diagnoses his symptoms can be amplified because of those hormones. Just like, I think we went through some of those things as well, but we didn't have the knowledge then
Right.
to understand what it was, or, even what coping skills were.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that when I was young at all.
Right. So I want to know, since you've shared about your experiences and kind of like your coming to terms moment with your diagnoses and the way that you process how you feel, what was it like? Like, tell us a little bit about your experience, kind of opening up with your parents about it. Like,
Mhm.
having like those. I don't know if you had a conversation with your parents. I do remember a specific moment where like things got serious with my mental
Mhm.
health,
Mhm.
and it was an uncomfortable position for me to be in to deal with my parents because I always want them, and this is a part of my mental health journey as well,
Yeah.
and my fear of rejection and things like that. My biggest thing is I always want to make my parents proud, and my biggest fear is disappointing them. So
Mhm.
there was a time, and I'll just be open about it. There was a time where I was having dark thoughts. I was in a dark place. I was having some suicidal thoughts. Um, and I think it really scared my parents because they do come from a generation where it's not really talked about. It's kind of still taboo as far as dealing with like depression and anxiety.
Mhm.
And they were scared. They still loved me and everything. They wanted to know what they could do to help. Sometimes when you get to like that point in your life, it's not about what they can do because your parents can't protect you from everything.
Right.
But I do remember that day distinctively sitting down and talking with them about, my mental health. So tell
Mhm.
me a little bit about your experience, like if you did have that kind of experience with your parents.
So I think mine was pretty gradual and happened in different ways, and I'll expand it to my whole family because this happened like the realization happened for me a little later in life, right?
Hmm.
So, and I think I still want approval from my parents, from my big sister, even from like my niece and nephew, right? Even from family members. It was interesting. I'll just share this with you kind of as a backdrop. When my marriage failed before I became a foster parent, and when I went through all that, it was interesting because my sister said, like, "You recovered so quickly." Uh,
Hmm.
and I can't tell you exactly why that happened or how it happened, but I think that I was put in a position, or I allowed myself to be in a position where I was very unhappy, but again, I didn't know how to end an unhealthy relationship.
Hmm.
And so I put up with a lot until I had no choice. The circumstances were such that, the relationship had to end. And so my mom and dad have always been supportive, my family's supportive, like you really got through that, which kind of supported this superwoman thing I had going on, right?
Hmm.
But then became a foster mom, and when my foster son went to his birth mom, I fell apart completely. Still didn't realize there was a diagnosis there, didn't have a label to it, but I was like, "This hurts so much more than my divorce."
Hmm.
When I started interacting, frequently with my son's birth parents, I became more educated on mental illness and different types of mental health conditions because of his birth mom and the challenges that she had. A lot of that and working through with my therapist caused me to look at myself. So as I started realizing, like, hey, I do have some things going on, I need to address this. I started sharing it with my family, but in different ways. Like
Hmm.
you, I had some moments that were very dark, very, very dark. And I remember saying in a text to my niece, saying but not saying, I'm in a really dark place.
Right.
And I was like, how can I do this? I have this innocent child who's 100% dependent on me. I've got to change the way I'm thinking.
Hmm.
And so I didn't tell my parents that I was ever in such a dark place. But what I did do was start educating them, starting really my mom, because my dad is not he's not really a talker. He does
Hmm.
listen and then
Yeah.
he comes to his own conclusions. But yeah, but I started talking to my mom a lot more about it and then kind of sharing some things with her about me and kind of where I was. And as time has gone on, my family, I don't think there was really judgment. I just think there was a lack of understanding. It started with me. There's a lack of understanding from me. And so for me, with everything that I do, I kind of look at three tenets. I look at awareness, acceptance, and advocacy. And not only doing that for my son, I had to do it for myself as well.
Hmm.
And so my family has been very supportive. At first, they didn't understand even why I shared my story, but I felt called to share my story with my son. And I couldn't exactly explain it other than I wanted people to know, like, hey, you're not alone. So it really became like an organic part of me. And I think, my family loves me. So they opened up a lot to, hey, we all have things going on. And as we have life experiences, there are going to be times in our lives that we go through something, postpartum depression, losing a child. When I had a miscarriage, I went through a lot, but I couldn't put a name to it, and maybe I didn't need a name to it. I just knew I wasn't good. I wasn't okay.
Right.
And so how many years passed before I realized, like, hey, it's okay not to be okay. And I know that's overused a lot, but it's still true.
Mm-hmm.
It's still true. But if we're not okay, like I wasn't, like I needed to open up to my family. It's very easy for me to advocate on someone else's behalf. It's been much more difficult and a process for me to do that for myself. And so I've had to learn healthy ways to feed my spirit, right? Yes, there's therapy, but also me sharing our story is healing for me.
Right. I definitely I feel that on so many different levels. I really liked when you said, you had like the superwoman thing going on, because
Mhm.
I feel like a lot of time, especially as like Black women, we take on like the strong Black woman narrative. And even
Yes.
though like I'm still young, I want, and I don't know why, it's probably just embedded like within us that we want to come off as strong rather than weak, because we do
Mhm.
face a lot of pressures from the world. So especially, I think it was very hard opening up to like not just my parents, but like my family, as in my parents and my sisters. I
Mhm.
didn't want them to know. I like a part of me felt still like ashamed and embarrassed because
Right.
I shouldn't be going through this. Like I'm a college student. I graduated from Spelman, so like there was just like all of the pressures from like going to the number one HBCU in the country, and that was a big deal to me. And I did, the last thing that I wanted to do was fail.
Mhm.
And I felt essentially, I feel like at that moment I was like failing them. Even
Yeah.
though that experience, me being in college, like it was for me, I felt like if I don't get it together, I'm going to come back home and I'm not going to complete what I set out to do. And I felt
Right.
like that to me was like the epitome of failure. And I did not want that,
Mhm.
associated with myself. And yeah, I mean there still are times when like I'll close my door. I don't want anybody to see me crying. I just kind of want to like go through the emotions by myself. But it is healthier to have somebody, outside of therapy,
Mhm.
because you don't see your therapist, 24/7, or probably like as often as you see your family. So
Right.
I think it
Right.
definitely is important to kind of break those barriers and to allow
Absolutely.
people that genuinely love you unconditionally to come into your space and support.
Mhm.
Now, that's not to say that, sometimes we do need our moments by ourselves, maybe
Yeah.
to recollect, but at the same time,
Mhm.
you don't have to bottle everything up and carry this
Right.
entire load on your shoulders, because you do have a village.
Yeah. And what I would say about that is, it's interesting how it happened for me. And I love, that we go back to the statement about superwoman, right?
Mhm.
Being a superhero. I also think that, for me, in the workplace, I was a rising leader in my
Mhm.
company. This is not the Compassionate Companion. This is in corporate America. I ended up getting 2 master's degrees, one from Johns Hopkins, one from the American University in Washington, D.C. And I chuckled
Congratulations.
when you said Spelman was the number one uh, HBCU, because I have a lot of friends that go to A&T who may not agree with you, but I get
Mhm.
it.
You know
Because
what? That's okay.
HBCUs, but I was just chuckling about that. But I say all that to say that that I think the real strength is asking for help. I think the real strength is in opening up. When we hide from our problems, like people, generally speaking, don't hide from cancer, right? We rally around that person. We send meals. We send our love. We do cards. We check.
Mhm.
But we got to start doing that for someone dealing with a mental health condition.
Right.
Whatever that looks like, rallying around them, because that is a part of our health. And we know that our mental health does impact our physical health, right? And so for me at work, I'm, climbing the ranks, and I'm, prosperous, and I'm making good money. But inside,
Mhm.
what was I feeling inside? Inside, I still felt empty. Inside, still felt like I wasn't good enough. Inside, I still felt like less than. I
Mhm.
can have all I can show you around my office. I have all these accolades, and that's great. But the thing I couldn't do was become a mom. The thing that I couldn't do was take care of myself. And over time, with support, therapy, friends. The same person who got me into becoming a foster mom also had experiences with her parent who was dealing with mental health conditions, who had a lot of experience with mental health and mental health challenges. And she held my hand through a lot of things. I mean, we've been through ups, downs all around in our relationship, but she understood. And now we support each other, we educate each other because there's always something more to learn. But I had to be open to that, to like, hey, Carla, you're not perfect. You're never going to be perfect. Stop trying it. I have a book that says perfection is the sure cure for happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. Like, you cannot be perfect. So get over it. Be your best. Be your best
Right.
self. And that's what I try to do. And I'm such a proponent. I'm such an advocate for having a strong support system and refreshing that support system when it doesn't serve you. I mean, you can still have someone in your life who you love, but if they're not supporting you in a way that's healthy or helpful, then you deal with them in a different way, but you don't have to have their support for this particular challenge,
Right.
which can become all consuming, right?
Mm-hmm.
It can take over everything. And so even with my son, I talk openly with my son about mental health conditions, about mine, about his birth moms. He recently lost his birth mom. I mean, we haven't seen her in years, but she passed away from fentanyl poisoning.
Mm-hmm.
I knew it was going to impact him. I didn't know how much it would impact me, but she was a part of my life for over 6 years. And without her, there would be no him.
Right.
How could I not feel something? But it was a total shock to me that I was mourning. How,
Mm-hmm.
how was I mourning someone who caused me so much pain? But I had a love for her. And I had to come to terms with that. And it's okay for me to mourn her because I did want her to heal. I did want her to get better. I wanted them to reconcile one day. And again, I would not be a mom if it wasn't for her.
Right.
And this was a woman who had such pain. She had 25 pregnancies, 11 births. She lost custody and her parental rights to all 11 of her children over time. What was her childhood like? So I
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of compassion. I had to really put my pain in perspective. It was real. That pain was real and it was so hurtful. And it took me to my knees and beyond, but I still loved her. And it's okay for me to give myself permission to mourn that.
Mm-hmm.
It's different than mourning the loss of my mother.
Right.
It's still a loss. And it's okay for me to feel that and experience that. I think giving ourselves permission to experience and feel what we feel is so powerful. I think sharing our stories, if a person is willing and up to it, is powerful. It makes me feel powerful to do that and to share. And so, I was more than happy to come on this show today to say, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people in this world, in this country, across the globe, deal with a mental health condition. Why are we hiding from it? We can't hide from it. It's there. It's more
Yeah.
prevalent uh, than almost anything, but we hide from it, and we don't have to. We don't have to suffer in silence. We don't have to be alone at all. So I'll get off my pedestal, off my high horse now, and turn it back over to you.
No, I definitely you are completely correct. And I think I don't want to be a hypocrite and get on here and say, you definitely should embrace your vulnerability. And because I know that there are definitely days where I try and I try to escape those feelings. I don't, it's hard
You're
like
human.
feeling down.
Mhm,
But at the same time, that is a part of my therapy journey. It's a part of
mhm,
like my self, like awareness and self realization journey. Is that just like you said, it's okay to not be okay,
mhm,
and it's so much easier to embrace those feelings of whatever mental illness that like you're facing or your mental poor mental health that you're dealing with. It's easier to embrace those feelings rather than to fight it, because if you keep fighting it, it's
mhm.
just nothing but a struggle and you're not going to win. if you're going to keep fighting. You're not going to truly embrace who you are as a person, embracing the fact that you are dealing with something and that you have people to help you. Rather than just like don't try and fight it. And like I said, that's also something that I'm learning. So, and I may not get it right every time. And that's another thing. You don't, sometimes you may fail. You might not get it right, but that's okay too. So
I think as long as we're trying to process our emotions, as long as we're trying to deal with it, because I am the retired queen of compartmentalization, right?
yes, yeah,
I'm task oriented. Give me, if I'm dealing something with that emotionally in the past, give me 10 tasks and I'll do 20.
hmm
Bam, bam, bam. I'll knock them out because I don't have to deal with my feelings that way. I don't
right,
have to face whatever is hurting me. I can put it over here in this box, but the box doesn't just sit there, right? It festers and it hurts us. And I don't want to feel, I don't want that feeling to stay. I don't want it to linger. But of course, I've done it for years. Even now, I have to talk myself through things when I want to put it in a box. And sometimes it has to go into a box, right?
right,
For a period of time. And that's okay too. We just don't want to, I don't want to have 10 boxes over here that are that are sitting on my shoulders like an 800-pound gorilla. I don't want that. I want to, with support and in time, process those feelings so I can deal with my emotions. And so that's what I try to do. But I also recognize the value and power. So my son is 13 now, but because of the trauma he's experienced, I would say he has some developmental delays, right? He's a very smart kid, but emotionally, he might not be at the same level as other 13-year-olds. But I talk to him, even I will say to him, like I'm not feeling great today. I told him recently, just the other day, one of my girlfriends just lost her mother, one of my sorority sisters. She just lost her mom. And I said, I'm going to go be with her. And he said, Mom, please tell her for me. It's going to be hard, but you're going to be okay. And you have really good memories and I've been through it and I'm still going through it. And so I thought, wow, how powerful for this 13-year-old and to look outside of himself, right? I want to help someone I've only met 3 times, but I still want to help them because I
right,
want them to know that what you're feeling is not a bad thing. Like feeling whatever it is we're feeling. Like we don't even celebrate the good things enough in my opinion. Like I don't necessarily take the time to stop and say, "Oh my God, I made it through that." I want to have a party,
yeah,
like people have divorce parties. I want to have a party to say like, yeah, we made it through this situation, and I'm kind of exaggerating, but what I'm saying is real. Like the progress we make is important. The setbacks are important too, but I'll say I tend to focus on what I've done wrong and not give myself the grace that I give to other people.
hmm
I have to consciously do that for myself too.
right. I think that's amazing. And what I wanted to do was share 2 quick statistics that I found because I want to go back to what you said about when you have conversations with your son and kind of like what that looks like when you're kind of both dealing with your mental health struggles. So let me share these 2 statistics and then we're going to get right back to that. So I found on the Center of the Control Disease, the
Centers of
CDC.
Disease
Yeah.
Control.
So, yeah, I found on the CDC that one of the studies that they conducted found that 1 in 14 children have a caregiver with poor mental health. And those children were more likely to have poor general health, to have a mental, emotional, or developmental disability, or to have an adverse childhood experience. And another thing that I found was a result from the National Survey of Drug Use and Health found that mental illness was more common amongst mothers than fathers, and more prevalent in parents under the age of 50 as opposed to the latter. So I found those statistics to be interesting. For it to be for mental illness to be more prevalent in mothers than fathers. I think also because there's kind of like, I know both parents have like that biological tie to their child, but like for a mother to like really carry her son, or like the maternal instincts, if you did not personally carry your child, like your son is adopted. Like what do you think about that? And then I also want to go back to, what does it look like facilitating a conversation between you and your son when those days of maybe symptoms of his mental illness are like going head in head with maybe the things that you're experiencing.
Yeah. So as far as the statistics, sorry, here I go now. It's contagious. As far as the stats, what I would say is I'm not surprised. And I do refer to the CDC often because of the ACEs study, the adverse childhood experiences. And I learned a lot about trauma through that. But as far as mothers being in that situation, I mean, there are so many single mother households, single parent households. I'm not surprised. I do go back to the statement you made about being a strong Black woman. I really think that's detrimental to us, at least the way it's defined in society. I think the strength is in asking for help, really. And we're kind of taught not to do that, like put ourselves last, push everything else first. And of course, this is a broad statement. That doesn't mean every mother does this. It doesn't mean that every woman does this. But Black men or Black women, even in the workplace, right? We have to do better. We have to work twice as hard. This is what we used to think. And I think we've come to a point, especially with entrepreneurship, that a lot of people are saying, I'm not willing to do that. I'll work twice as hard for myself or for something I believe in. But why should I have to work twice as hard as somebody who just gets it freely? I shouldn't have to do that. What can I do for myself? So I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent a little bit, but I just think there are so many pressures on us as women, as Black women, and I believe Black men feel it as well, just a lot of times in a different way. So I definitely don't see an us versus them. I just think sometimes the struggles are different. And I do know single Black fathers also who deal with a lot of this too. You just don't hear about it as much. But as women, I think we take on so much. We want to save the world. We want to save our children. We want to everyone to be okay. And we do put ourselves last. And so it doesn't surprise me. I think also we don't necessarily focus enough on things like intergenerational trauma, which have a significant impact on how we parent, on how we live our lives. Like we have the opportunity to free ourselves of what happened before, but we have to know there are other options out there. And a lot of times, if we stay just in our tight box, we don't know about that. And again, that's why I think it's so important to get our stories out and for people to know, like, hey, I'm not the only one who suffered in silence from a situation. I'm not the only one who thought, this doesn't feel right, but I don't know what to do that's different. And I think you can see things on TV and you can read things, but there's a difference between that and making a connection with someone who has had traumatic experiences or who grew up in a family or in an environment where trauma was just passed down unintentionally, but that's what happened. Now, as far as how did I answer your question there?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So as far as my son, first of all, I've done a lot of training. I've had a lot of education around trauma because I needed it. I didn't really understand it. I had to learn and start understanding not only my mental health challenges, but my son's as well. And so as an adult who grew up with a strong foundation, I do know how to take what I'm dealing with and just put it over here for a minute when my son is in crisis,
Mm-hmm.
and help him through a crisis, and help settle him down. And what I mean by that is when my son is triggered,
Mm-hmm.
his response can be explosive, right? It could be verbal. There were times when it was physical. What I've learned about my child through time and therapy and just experiences is physical touch means a lot to him. So I may take him, and he's a big kid, like he's over 200 pounds, like he's a big kid. And I may just touch his shoulders. I may hug him, and he may not
Mm-hmm.
want to hug me at first, but I know him. Like I wouldn't force someone into a hug, but I know
Right.
my child, and in 2 minutes, in 30 seconds, he melts into my arms because I know that he needs that touch. You
Mm-hmm.
know, his trauma response, fight, flight, or freeze. He might flee or he might fight. And fight has been more his norm. So I have to help him, and I've learned to help him, and then help him understand like some coping skills as he's learned in therapy. But it's one thing learning it, it's a different thing practicing it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when we get into a calm space, because I've learned like you cannot correct someone like they're doing the wrong thing when they're in crisis. You just can't do that. So we get calm, we get centered. I try with all my might, and I'm not always successful, to
Mm-hmm.
stay calm, to look him in his eyes, to get on his level. If he's sitting on the floor, I'm going to sit on the floor. If he's standing up, I'm standing up. You know, if he's sitting down, I may come and just put my arm around him. We get settled and we get stabilized. You know, I'll force him something. And when I say force, I don't mean it literally. Like, let's take some deep breaths together to reset our brains. And then when things are settled, we typically can have a really candid conversation. And there are no consequences to that conversation. I want him to say what he's really feeling. And I'm able to do the same. I'm able to tell him the impact of this on me, not to make him feel guilty, but just that he understands the whole situation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how we might be able to catch it before it gets to that extent. But mainly when I'm talking to him about what I'm going through, they are in calm moments. I try to do it in the calm moments, but I also want to normalize to him that we're all going through things. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we're all dealing with challenges. And I'll tell you, my parents did an amazing job raising my sister and me. You know, they paid for our undergraduate education. They loved us. They worked in factories. They worked overtime. They did all these things. And they did what they thought was right in terms of raising us. And I love them for that. One thing we didn't see was conflict. We never saw them in conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So my sister and I both have had to learn how to manage conflict in healthy ways, how to disconnect when something is not right for us, or how to have healthy boundaries, because they were that couple that was like, we're going to be married forever, period. Good times, bad times, it doesn't matter. This
Yeah.
is what we're going to do. And I love that. And things are different now. You know, people, just like people don't stay in jobs for 20 years, people don't stay in marriages forever, or they do because they're both committed to working through and working things out. But you have to have two people willing to do that. So with my son, I talked to him about the realities of life. I mean, he has seen so much. We talked about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. His ACEs score was a 10 out of 10, and mine was a 0 out of 10. I
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of learning to do, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I've had to grow as a person. That's why people will say, like, he's so lucky to have you. I think we're blessed to have each other because it
Yeah.
changed who I am as a person.
Mm-hmm.
It's made me compassionate, but in healthy ways. It's made me more understanding. It's opened my eyes to so much that I didn't even know existed in this world. And yeah, I was well traveled, at American. If anybody's familiar with American University, you have people from all cultures. all cultures there. And, there was a certain cultural insensitivity on my part because, I had that, we're Americans, but
Mhm.
no, everybody has a story. Everybody has life situations, and we are all in learning mode. Hopefully, we're always in learning mode. And so I I share that stuff with my son. I have him go with me. Like recently, I went and talked to a group of children in an underserved community, Black African American children. And last year, they received a copy of the book my son and I did called My Big Notebook, which helps kids learn how to process their feelings in like through creative expression, like writing, coloring, drawing. And it tells some stories from my son's life. But he went with me. The kids got the book last year, right?
Mhm.
This year we went. And then we talked, the director of the program, Rodney McGill, he asked me to talk about entrepreneurship. Like, how did we take our mess and turn it into a message? How do we
Right.
take our test and turn it into a testimony? And saying to kids, like, you have talents, you have skills. And so my son did this with me, along with a really good friend of mine who experienced her own trauma as a child, who went through the foster care system in New York City, who has children dealing with mental health conditions, who's dealt with her own experiences. And so the three of us made such a great team
Mhm.
because we all have that feeling that we want better for others, but we've learned how to do it in ways that don't compromise our own mental health.
Okay. I like that. I like that a lot. I think that I appreciate the fact that you said that you went through like a lot of training to be able to
Mhm.
understand yourself in the way that it's like the dynamic between you and your son when you both are
Mhm.
dealing with your own separate challenges. I feel like a lot of from my experience, this is not off of like any like factual information, but I think that there are a lot of times in Black communities where it's not as healthy and as simple as like having a conversation of, I'm understanding my son and my son is understanding me as a person
Mhm.
with these mental challenges. But instead of that, it's more so I'm dealing with my challenges. I'm going to take it out on my children. Then my children are going to take it out on me, and then it's not that kind of like harmonious like relationship. So, um, I actually think that which was going to bring me to like our closer part of the
Mhm.
podcast. As far as like community outreach and things like that, maybe classes that we can start to like integrate
Mhm.
within like our communities because
Mhm.
and it's not to say because I know that a lot of parents, not specifically like just Black parents, but I think that parents
Mhm.
across the charts don't really want to accept that maybe they might need some additional training, especially when
Mhm.
dealing with or being like a caregiver, guardian, parent, whatever, to somebody with a mental challenge,
Mhm.
or that they themselves might need that additional challenge to
Mhm.
kind of like be the best caregiver that they can be.
Yes.
But I feel like if we were to start implementing some of those programs, like within our communities, regardless of
Mhm.
socioeconomic status, because we do understand that not everybody has a luxury of like being able to like live in middle or upper classes.
That's right.
Um,
Mhm.
some people might not be able to afford it, but if we were able to, you know, like just like how they say, especially within our own community, it takes a village to raise
Mhm.
a child. So if
Yes.
we were able to like get together and give like free classes, just tips and tricks and like strategies of how to recognize the signs. Like we can
Mhm.
go all the way back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this episode, recognizing those signs, like maybe these are signs of anxiety in my 5, 6 year old,
Yes.
and being able to kind of learn from not only just like an instructor, but like from one another, like, oh, this worked for me, maybe you should try this.
The power of lived experience.
Yeah.
And so I take my lived experience and what I've learned through therapy, working with therapists,
Mhm.
I do those things because I don't think it's an either or situation. I think it's
Right.
the power of having the two uh, work collaboratively. I think it really gives insight. And sometimes talking to a professional can feel intimidating until you run across somebody who's done it themselves and
Mhm.
said, like, hey, I was really struggling. Or I know another mom, or I know another dad, or I know a family member. It may not even be a parent. It doesn't have to be a parent. It can be just all of us have interacted with someone or dealing with ourselves who is struggling mentally or emotionally. It's just a fact. And we can ignore that, or we can embrace it and really try to support each other. And so, I did some basic training that's offered, I know, here in the States. I think it's international as well, like mental health first aid. And there's a program
Mhm.
called Question, Persuade, Respond, QPR, which is, if you're dealing with someone who potentially has suicidal ideation or dealing with some type of suicide related crisis, that helps. But I think this forum, Black Mental Health Matters, is an excellent forum to have these kind of conversations, because we want people to know that you're not alone in this. Nobody is dealing with this, or doesn't have to deal with this in a vacuum. We are all dealing with challenges. And they're not just physical, they're not just financial. One thing I want to say real quick, because I know we're almost at time. I mentioned like where I was when I got like financially and all these things when I got custody of my son. My mental health impacted my financial health, my physical health. I was
Mhm.
pre-diabetic, all these things. So if we think it's in isolation, that's wrong. Mental health isn't over here and the physical health's over there. All
Right.
is connected. And the more we educate people around that and help connect those dots, I think the better off we are, because we all deserve to have joy in our lives, to be healthy, to be on a path of healing. I think it's so important for us to keep sharing and have two-way conversations. It's not just, that we're talking heads, like we're out there in the community and we're listening.
Yeah. I think I don't have children yet, but there are times where it crosses my mind that I'm afraid that I will go through bad postpartum depression, because I know how bad my depression gets, and I've seen it go to like darker places. But I that's something that I fear. But what I also, I will take the good with the bad. I feel as though hopefully when I get to that point where I'm ready to start having children, and I feel as though, or even just being proactive about it, not even waiting until like it gets to a point where I feel like I'm dealing with maybe postpartum depression or anything like that, setting myself up with a program, or just kind of like
Yes.
taking some classes, or getting involved with some community initiatives to even kind of coach myself, get really active like with my therapy. I go once a week now, but I would definitely like to like continue that once
Mhm.
I become a mother, so that way I can be proactive about my mental health, because I know the strain that that takes on women, and Black women especially. And I think in general, like you said, mental health first aid, it's not very widespread yet, but I'm hoping that, with platforms like Black Mental Health Matters, we can like really amplify and make
Mhm.
noise about it, because we can support one another. We have the tools, we
Yes.
have the resources, from higher class to lower class. We can do it if we work together, and if we continue to just keep stressing the message.
Yes. And I would just say to you, like in closing, just my comment to you is you are educated about this. It doesn't mean you don't have fears. It doesn't mean, I mean, we all have fears, right?
Right.
But you know enough to say, I need to have some support in place when I'm ready to venture out into that journey to motherhood, right? I didn't know that. I didn't have that because I didn't know to even think about it or ask for it, right? When I went through fertility challenges, I went through in vitro fertilization, I had a miscarriage. All of that takes a toll
Hmm.
on a family, right? It takes a toll on us emotionally and mentally. And I didn't know that I needed that support. But the more educated we become, the more we know. It doesn't mean you won't go through it,
Right.
but maybe it doesn't have to be so devastating to you. You
Right.
know, maybe you have the help in place. And then if that help isn't working, then there's other help, right? We can continue to refresh what our support system looks like. And so I just encourage you to continue down the path that you're going, and being educated is important. And one last thing I'm going to say, because I know we're at time. When I was always a staunch advocate for my child. There was a time when I wanted to get into this program through the Department of Social Services. It's called a resource parents guide to, trauma, or resource parenting 101, something like that. But I wasn't a foster parent anymore. And so the local Department of Social Services said I wasn't eligible. But there was another county an hour away that said I was. So I drove there for 8 weeks to learn, because I needed that for me to feel empowered as a parent to take care of my child. I need to do the same thing for myself, and you do too. All of us do, right? Whatever that step is, we don't have to take the first no. I never accept the first no. I'm going to keep pushing because I deserve it and my child deserves it too.
Right. Well, I want to thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I think this was very productive. I hope, our viewers got a good insight as to just what it's like to be a parent or in the position of being a caregiver, either with mental illness or taking care of somebody with mental illness, or even both at the same time. Dr. Lewis Hines, thank you for tuning in. He says, great conversation on the effects of trauma, parenting, and emotional wellness. I appreciate everybody that watched, subscribe, please, to our channel. And thank you so much. And we will see you on another episode of Black Mental Health Matters next Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you, Carla. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.